I always just thought that, that was like the coolest swap I'd ever seen. If you like small engines or 4 cylinders, you always want them to rev higher and higher. That's like one of the things that you shoot for. And then on top of that, the sequential transmission. And when I realized you could get both of those with Honda reliability for $6,500, it was kind of a no-brainer.
Welcome to the HPA Tuned In podcast. I'm Andre, your host, and in this episode, we're joined by Reed Stormzand, who has basically gone ahead and done what I'm imagining a lot of us listening have thought about from time to time, and that's jamming a sport bike engine into a Mazda MX-5 or Miata if you're from the US. On paper, this seems like a match made in heaven. You've got a lightweight car that's already well known for its handling, and then you're pairing this with an incredibly light engine that also makes great power. Obviously, it's not all plain sailing though, and there's a lot of intricacies that go into putting a motorcycle engine into a car. Obviously, one of the advantages is it comes equipped with a 6-speed sequential gearbox, which is kind of every boy racer's dream. The downside of that is relatively significant in so much as there's clearly no reverse gear in a motorbike. That's kind of a bit of a problem sometimes when it's a car application. We learn about Reed's background and how he's built up the skill set to perform this engine swap essentially single-handedly. We also find out about his day job where he works for ZZ Performance and is also instrumental in the build and development of their ATS-V drag car, which is currently, I think, number 2 in the world and within sight of breaking the world record. Before we jump into our chat, for those who are new to the Tuned In podcast, High Performance Academy is an online training school. We specialize in teaching people how to build performance engines, how to tune EFI, how to construct wiring harnesses. We also cover topics on fabrication, 3D modeling and CAD, race driver education, and data logging, just to name a few. You can find all of our courses at hpaacademy.com/courses. All of these courses are delivered in high-definition video modules that you can watch from anywhere in the world, provided you've got an internet connection. This means you can learn from the comfort of your own place and you can learn at your own pace. All of our courses also come with a 60-day, no questions asked, money-back guarantee. So if you purchase them for any reason at all, decide it wasn't quite what you expected, no problem, let us know. We'll give you a full refund. And for podcast listeners, you can also use the coupon code podcast75. That will get you $75 off the purchase of your very first HPA course. We'll put the coupon code in the show notes to make it nice and easy for you to find. Lastly, if you like free stuff, then I've got a great deal for you. We are constantly partnering with some of the biggest names in the aftermarket performance industry to give away some great prizes. You can always find our latest prize at hpaacademy.com/giveaway. It might be an aftermarket ECU or dash. It could be some engine components or engine building tools or just about anything in between. They are great prizes and we will ship them free of charge to your door if you're the winner. There's no tricks here, no purchase required to get your name into the draw. All right, enough with our introduction. Let's get into our interview now. All right, welcome to the podcast, Reed. Thanks for joining us today. And as always, let's start by diving into your background, specifically how you developed an interest in cars.
Okay, thanks for having me. Let's see, my background. Well, right now, I work at a place called ZZ Performance here in Michigan. I'm a welder fabricator for them. We sell mainly online, but we do some in-person stuff. It's like small engine GM cars, like 3800 Ecotec, Chevy Sonics. We're getting into the like 4-cylinder Cadillacs, 6-cylinder Cadillacs, stuff like that. I have some videos on my channel, but I'm actually helping build our ATS-V drag car, which has the LF4 V6, and we are chasing the quarter-mile world record with that car, and the quickest we've gone is at 8.82, and the world record sits at 8.77, so we're pretty close to that.
Yeah, that's within reach.
Yeah, that's been a pretty fun project, but how I actually got into cars was pretty much just from the internet and YouTube. I don't have a college degree or any formal training. Basically, everything that I've learned has come through my own trial and error or from the internet.
So that's including your fabrication skill set, that's all self-taught?
Yes. So when I started working at ZZP probably about 5 years ago. I knew how to weld, but I had some senior employees there really show me the ropes and kind of dial it in.
With your welding, what type of welding you doing? Is this MIG, TIG, or both?
All TIG, yeah, AC and DC TIG. So we're doing, exhaust systems and intakes and intercooler systems and stuff like that. So it was definitely good practice on like thin wall tubing and whatnot.
What did you sort of find the challenges when you were sort of working it out by trial and error with TIG welding? Because it is, I think it's much more complicated than MIG, which is kind of a point and shoot sort of method. Yeah, there's a lot to the machine setup with a TIG, much more complicated than MIG. So I kind of, from my own experience, if you've got your settings on your machine wrong, no matter what you're doing, you're not going to get a good result.
Yes and no, at least for me. I mean, as far as like if you're pulse welding, yeah, that's a lot of that's down to the settings. But I mean, the main settings for DC, if you're just welding freehand, is your amperage and then setting up your torch, the cup size and the argon flow and the tungsten stick out. But yeah, if your settings on pulse aren't dialed in, then yeah, you can mess some things up.
A little sort of down in the weeds here, but seeing as you bring it up, can you talk to us a little bit about pulse welding, what that is and what it actually achieves?
The way I kind of think about it, or the way I was taught, is that pulse welding is generally used for thin materials where you're trying to keep the heat out of it to stop from shrinking and warping. But basically what it is as you weld, you're going to have a main on pulse where you're going to get a lot of amperage. The puddle is going to act like a normal weld, but it's only going to be for maybe about a half second or so. And then the weld is going to have an off pulse. It's not going to go completely off, but the
amperage is greatly reduced.
Yeah, the puddle's not going to be melting anymore. So you're basically welding, you're on, off, on, off.
Do you find using a pulse method like that helps you with your timing of adding filler into the weld puddle to get a more consistent sort of stacked dime look to your welds?
When I pulse, I usually just pulse right over the rod. I hold the rod in the weld joint and pulse right over it and kind of weld both sides and the rod at once.
Okay. So with your work at ZZ Performance, what as a fabricator are you actually doing there? What's your sort of day-to-day look like?
Day-to-day is if I'm not working on the ATS-V drag car, I'm in the production fabrication shop. So we're doing large runs of parts, batch quantities. That's how we can do it for a little less, make a big quantity at once. But we're building exhaust parts to jigs, basically. You got a flange on either end, and then you got to connect them somewhere with a tube.
I guess give us a sense of the scale of this business. How many employees are there?
I think we have around 50 employees. So we have...
Okay, so this is a big operation.
Yeah, we have like 5 full-time fabricators, a bunch of people in the R&D department. We have like 3 tuners. It's a pretty big operation.
It's an interesting business model. Everyone sort of in that GM world has sort of gravitated towards the LS platform, which is the big dog. So why is ZZ Performance sort of gravitated towards the smaller displacement, smaller cylinder count engines?
Well, ZZP got their start with the 3800 engine in the Grand Prix. That was their bread and butter back in the day. They started racing the supercharged ones, and then they started going into turbocharging them, setting records, winning races. So, and then after that, they branched off into the 4-cylinder Ecotech cars like the Cobalts, and same thing. Started breaking records, started winning races. So I think that's always been ZZP's bread and butter is the small engine stuff. The markets aren't as saturated, which allows us to kind of take over a market, if you will.
Yeah, I guess that's a valid point. The LS market is very well saturated at this point. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of performance workshops around the world making parts and tunes for them. So I guess you've got a market largely to yourself.
Yeah, mostly. So that's nice.
So in terms of the work that you're doing for ZZ Performance, are you involved at all with developing new parts, or are you purely sort of in a production phase, just building exhausts or components on jigs?
So me personally, I'm slightly involved in the R&D department. My main task right now is that ATS-V drag car. Like when an ATS-V comes in the shop, we'll we'll 3D scan the undercarriage of it, and we'll get all the locations so we can draw up our own exhaust system in CAD. And then we have a CNC tube bender. We'll bend it up, weld it up, and then, see how it performs and see how it sounds, which something interesting about those cars actually is, I don't know what it is with that V6, but if you do not have a crossover or some sort of merge in that exhaust system, they're just raspy and they do not sound good. So ZZP was actually the first to put an H pipe in the downpipes on that platform, which is pretty cool.
And that fixes that rasp.
Oh yeah, so it's a H pipe between the downpipes, and then it goes down and merges again with an X, and then leaves the rear of the car. So
okay. I can only imagine having access to a CNC bender makes your life a lot easier with production runs. Safe to assume that everything just comes off that CNC bender absolutely perfect, ready to go?
Yeah, mostly. Sometimes the bender has its limitations. Like for example, bends can't be within 6 inches of each other. You need a minimum 6-inch leg length between each bend. So sometimes we'll have to take some bends and cut them and do some butt joints. But yeah, it definitely helps with our production having that machine.
Okay. Would like to sort of dive into this ATS-V drag car a little bit, seeing as you've mentioned it. So you're obviously, as you mentioned, very, very close to that world record. Let's start, I guess, at the start though, for those who don't know what an ATS-V is. Can you give us a bit of a rundown on the platform?
Yep. I believe they started production in 2016. It's a Cadillac ATS-V. It's Alpha chassis, I think it's called, but it's a factory is a 3.6 liter V6 twin turbo. It's got an 8L90 automatic 8-speed transmission behind it, and they actually in stock form can make quite a bit of horsepower. We're making north of 600 on stock turbos, so that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, okay. So what was the sort of the basis for building this into a drag platform? Is this kind of a proof of concept to get ZZ Performance's name out there for the platform?
Yes, that's exactly what it is. So we want to break the world record and hold the world record of the fastest and quickest ATS-V in the world in the quarter mile.
All right, well, talk to us about that journey. Sort of what modifications have you had to go down? I mean, I'm aware, obviously, if you're chasing world records, there might be a bit of IP that you want to keep to yourself, which is absolutely fine. But at a high level, what's been involved in developing that car?
Well, the first thing, we bought a auction car that had some front end damage, and those cars stock have air to water intercooler systems on them. So they have all these heat exchangers in the front for that. And, they have the core on top of the engine. Well, this car worked out great for what I wanted to do for it because, like I said, it was racked in the front. So I didn't need any of those heat exchangers because I was going to go air to air with a big single turbo. So I grabbed a naturally aspirated intake manifold because those engines came in different cars as 3.6 liters NA engines. So I put one of those intake plenums on. And then I mounted a big single turbo up front with an air-to-air setup on it. And then we got to tuning it. A problem with those is they're DI, obviously, so you're kind of limited with your fuel system, which is unfortunate. But I did some auxiliary injection in the charge pipe pre-throttle body to get some extra fuel in there, and that seemed to work out pretty good.
So as with a lot of direct injected engines, not a lot of options off the shelf for larger size injectors.
Yeah, we have some XDI injectors in there, but what we're running into is the pump selection. The high pressure fuel pump selection is poor, and if someone does make one for it, they're not very reliable. So yeah.
So better to augment the DI with port injection or auxiliary fuel injection.
Yeah, basically that's what we're kind of stuck with right now.
Okay, so a few bits I just want to dig back into in a bit more detail. In stock form, you mentioned water-to-air intercoolers. Obviously, the sizing of those intercooler cores may have been problematic anyway, but for a drag application, did you consider retaining a water-to-air with like an ice bath? It's pretty typical for drag racing, where you can actually get that water down below ambient temperature. Obviously, only any good for a short run like drag racing.
Yeah, I considered it, but when you look at just the ease of plumbing an air to air, if you get a big enough core and get enough airflow through it, it's going to work. So that's what I went with.
Sure. And in terms of turbo selection, what was the driver behind going big single versus upgrading the twins?
Oh, that's just something that I kind of prefer, was a big single. I mean, they already come stock with twins, so I thought it'd be cool to do something different and put a big single on there. So
does that create some complexities for you around the fabrication, particularly with the exhaust manifold routing?
A little bit, but those engines actually have headifolds. So it's a single exit exhaust port on each cylinder head.
Okay. In terms of the engine itself, I can only assume that's been built to handle the additional power and stress that you're putting on it now?
Actually, it's not really that built. The factory rods are titanium. We were running stock pistons. The main problem with those engines is crank flex that we're really fighting. So we've tried to mess with different bearing clearances for the center two main journals. We're looking into doing a girdle, but yeah, it likes to eat main bearings because that crank is moving a lot.
I assume it's still a forged crankshaft in stock form.
Yeah. We're actually too is the main caps are walking. We've been seeing some aluminum transfer onto the steel caps, which is pretty crazy. So
yeah, I think it's easy when you've got an engine on the workbench to assume that everything's nice and rigid, but when you're making a lot of power and revving these things, it's more like a sort of a wet noodle flopping around sometimes.
Yep.
What is going to be the next step to resolving this bearing issue?
We have a billet crankshaft on order right now, so we're going to try that, and hopefully that doesn't noodle like you were saying.
Yeah, okay. So cylinder heads and head gasket sealing, is that all still stock or does that need work as well?
That's actually, so the last time at the drag strip after I ran that 882 pass, I did blow a head gasket due to what I think was some knock on cylinder 3, which is unfortunate because we're just having a hard time getting a lot of alcohol in the fuel with the limitations of the DI system. We have to run more gasoline because you need less of it, obviously. So running into some knock, and it blew the side of the head gasket out. So the next build, we're going to go more layers on the gaskets, head studs, and then we're going to try to add some methanol into the fuel and see if we can limit some of that knock.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the fuel. So I assume when you're saying alcohol percentages, you're talking an ethanol blend?
Yeah, so
you can't run E85 or E98 because of the DI. So where have you sort of got yourself in terms of ethanol content?
We've been running like E50.
Typically, I find that you get, it's a very non-linear scale when you go from pure pump gas to pure ethanol. I find by the time you get past about 35, maybe 40% ethanol, you've sort of got, I would guess here, probably 80% of the benefits of ethanol. And from that sort of point through to 100% ethanol, the gains are there, but they're much less significant. So I think you're probably in pretty good shape if you're around E50 anyway. How are you going about controlling the additional fuel that you're adding in the charge pipe?
I have 2 injectors in the charge pipe that are basically pulsing on off with a AEM pump controller.
Okay.
So it just kind of ramps up based on MAF. It ramps the duty cycle higher and higher as that MAF sweeps up.
How well was that sort of controlling your air fuel ratio? If you sort of did a full ramp run on your dyno, are you able to get pretty good control of the air fuel ratio, or is it sort of a bit hit and miss?
We have pretty good control over it. We basically leave the aux on. We don't touch the aux settings, and then we dial it in with the DI tuning on HP tuners.
Okay. And HP Tuners gives you full support for every aspect of the tuning on that platform?
Yeah.
What about transmission-wise? Are you still running the stock auto?
Yeah, we're still running the stock transmission. We're having difficulty getting it to shift hard, I guess, for lack of a better term. Basically, what's happening is to make the power on the engine side that we're making, we have to scale the torque back in the ECU. So the ECU is recording or showing less torque than we're actually making. So it's not giving the transmission the line pressure that we would like.
So the transmission essentially thinks that the engine torque is lower than it really is.
Correct. Yeah.
So with the transmission seeing essentially a lower torque figure, what's the implications on that? The line pressure you said is lower, so it's just not shifting quickly.
Just sloppy shifts, and it's probably hurting some of our ET, and it's probably gonna burn up the clutches eventually.
Any workaround for this in the future?
We're exploring 8 HP swap.
Okay. What would be involved in an 8 HP swap into that platform?
A standalone transmission controller for the 8 HP.
Does that still need some input, though, from the factory engine control unit?
You can use CAN bus for that. You can feed it torque and whatnot, or you can just run it without that, and have it see, RPM and throttle position and just the basic inputs for a transmission.
I think that the 8HP swaps sort of at the moment gaining a lot of momentum. I personally haven't experienced one, but from everyone I talk to, it gives you the best of both worlds. A gearbox that's basically bulletproof and shifts as fast as a sequential dog box, but then you put it in auto mode and you're basically driving around in a modern BMW. I guess from a perspective of supporting this platform and shooting for world records, do you sort of have to consider how far away you move from the stock platform, a gearbox swap, for example? Does it make it less relevant to potential customers?
Well, luckily for us, we have several ATSVs that are built at different levels. So my car is like the all-out drag car, but then we have other more streetable cars that we can show customers, hey, this is what you can do with stock turbos. This is what you can do with upgraded turbos and upgraded fuel system. You might only run, mid nines, but the car is actually streetable. So
a mid-9 street car is a very fast car.
Yeah.
With HP tuners, are there any limitations? I'll rephrase the question. I think when it comes to deciding between a standalone ECU and reflashing a factory ECU, that line is not very black and white these days. You can kind of just about do anything you want with a reflash package, but where I find often it makes more sense to switch to a standalone is for dedicated motorsport, because you can have controls for things like launch control, traction control, etc. So on that basis, is there any limitations in tuning using the HP Tuners platform that's sort of holding you back?
I would say, like you said, with the launch control and being able to ramp and boost with time, or a lot of things that these serious drag racers are doing these days is a little bit of a limitation. But I think at the same time, if we can run 850s on the stock ECU with HP tuners, I think that is kind of more impressive than just wiring in a standalone and just having it kind of be easy, if you will. So I think there is something to say about that as far as, kind of bragging rights, I guess, for our in-house tuners.
Sure. Yeah. We haven't actually talked about boost levels and power. What is it running?
It runs 32, 33 PSI. We only dynoed it up to, I think, 20. It made like right around 800 wheel horsepower at 26 PSI. So we're probably right around 1,000 right now at, 32, 33 PSI.
Are you doing anything in terms of boost control down the track? And I'm talking here sort of speed or gear dependent boost to sort of get that power to the track?
No, we're just running a manual boost controller, and it gets the same boost for the whole pass.
All of the boost all of the time?
Yep.
All right, so what's the next step to get you down to these 850s?
Well, we got to get into the 870s first. We need an engine to hold together. So there's still a couple events left this year. We're going to get some cooler air, and hopefully we can at least get the record this year, and then try to go faster next year.
So ultimately, you're being held back at the moment by the bearing reliability, which you mentioned with the crank flex?
Yeah.
Okay. What about the rest of the platform in terms of drivetrain differential? Is that something that is reliable in stock form, even at these sort of 880s, 870 mark?
Yeah, it's, like I said, stock transmission, stock drive shaft, stock differential, stock axles. The fastest I went to a 60-foot was 132. And we haven't, knock on wood, I haven't broken any driveline components. So It's pretty impressive.
That's actually insanely impressive that stock components are reliable, seemingly reliable at that sort of 80 mile an hour. That's a real credit to them, I think. Suspension-wise, this is something I actually saw on your YouTube channel, and I think it's something that a lot of people drag racing overlook when you've got an independent rear suspension. You're actually looking at what's happening to the alignment when the car's squatting, correct?
Yeah, all summer we've been racing it, and it just steers left really hard after the launch, and we couldn't really figure it out. And we decided to take it to an alignment rack and put a ratchet strap on the back and strap it down and see if it was towing out or doing anything weird during that launch, like you're saying. And it actually, surprisingly, the alignment didn't change much during the squat, but we ended up putting some toe in the rear under that squat, and it seems to drive a lot more straight now.
So it doesn't actually see a lot of essentially bump steer between static ride height and when it's squatting.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, GM obviously is, they know what they're doing. So I'm not really surprised that there is no rear bump steer. But like I said, I'm pretty sure that toe in on the back definitely helped.
Yeah, I would imagine that would definitely help it track straighter. One of the things we did exactly the same with my own drag car and an Evo 9 we built as well. And it was more about the camber change actually for us, trying to set it up essentially with zero camber at the right height it squats to during the launch. So at that point, which is obviously the most critical, we've got the most rubber contacting the track. And I think that does help, but you're sort of starting to get down into the weeds with very small improvements. But anything you can do to shave a tenth off to the 60 foot is going to pay dividends at the deep end.
Yep.
Would you ultimately look at swapping this to a standalone, or you do want to just carry on and see how much bragging rights you can get on a reflash platform?
Yeah, we're going to stick with HP tuners. I mean, that's what our tuners know, and that's what we do. So,
yep, fair enough. If you're a fan of the podcast and you're interested in topics like engine tuning, automotive wiring, performance engine building, 3D modeling in CAD, or anything else in the high-performance industry, I have something that you might be interested in. Introducing the High Performance Academy VIP package. This package of courses gives you lifetime access to all of HPA's online training for one price. These courses cover everything from tuning and reflashing petrol and diesel engines, through to motorsport wiring, engine building, fabrication, design, car setup, and plenty more. Right now, you can get $500 off High Performance Academy's VIP package using the code PODCAST500 at checkout. Becoming a VIP means you'll never pay for another course again. You'll get instant access to all 40 plus courses we currently offer, plus every new course we ever release in the future. Want to define maps or tune with WinOLS? Curious about CAN bus devices, or how CAD can help make your dream build a reality? These in-depth topics, as well as many others, each have their own dedicated course that are going to help you master whatever it is you want to learn. And as a VIP member, you're not just getting the courses, you'll also join HPA's online community with lifetime access to our member forums and members' webinar lessons. Again, the code is podcast500 for that $500 discount. Just head over to hpacademy.com to check out the full VIP package and everything it contains. All right, let's get back to the episode. All right, why I think you came on our radar in the first place was actually another project car that I wanted to talk about, which is your Mazda Miata with a motorcycle engine in it and a turbocharger. So let's dive into that project. How did that project actually start, and what was the use case for the car?
The project actually, I didn't know this, but the project actually started probably about 10 years ago. I didn't even own a Miata, but I was watching, like I said, I got into cars from YouTube, and I was watching a lot of YouTube, and a video popped up on Jay Leno's Garage, and it was Matt Brown with his CBR1000-swapped S600 or N600. It's like an old Honda convertible, like 60s, tiny car. And I always just thought that, that was like the coolest swap I'd ever seen. I mean, it's, if you like small engines or four cylinders, you always want them to rev higher and higher and higher. That's like one of the things that you shoot for. And then on top of that, the sequential transmission. And when I realized you could get both those with Honda reliability for $6,500, it was kind of a no-brainer.
So 6,500 is what you have to pay for a road going CBR1000 RR.
Yeah, right around there. But yeah, I had the Miata. I bought one and kind of tinkered around with a little bit. I ended up turbocharging the 1.8 liter BP engine in it. It made like 180 horsepower. It was on a piggyback ECU. And, I kind of just did the standard, what everyone does. You do a turbo kit and then you want more power. So you do ethanol and then you do a bigger turbo. And basically, by the time I was done with it, it was a built engine. It was standalone ECU, all the stuff. It made like 450 wheel horsepower.
I would say that's a pretty healthy Miata.
Yeah, but the thing about me that I don't think a lot of people appreciate is I like to build stuff more than I like to drive stuff. So when I was done with it, it basically just sat in my garage. I didn't drive it, and there was nothing else left to wrench on. There was no more upgrades to do. So I ended up parting that out, and the rolling chassis just sat in my garage for like a year. And then that's when I started working at ZZP. I started looking around and saying, oh, I got access to CNC machines and a lathe and a mill, and I know how to weld now. So that's where I kind of went back to that Matt Brown video that I'd seen 10 years ago and thought, well, it's not as light as his car, but I bet I can get this thing pretty light. And that's when I decided to give it a shot.
Okay. Were there ever any other engines that were considered from the automotive world as opposed to motorcycle world, or did you have your heart set on doing the CBR swap?
Well, I knew that.
I mean, obviously, there's just about any engine under the sun has been put in a Miata at this point in time.
Yeah. Basically, the problem for me with the original Miata build was I didn't feel like I built it. I was basically just bolting on parts that other people had made. So for the next iteration of the car, I really wanted to do something that no one could just buy a swap kit for. Not that no one's ever done it, because other people have before, like I said, but I wanted to basically challenge myself and come up with something that was hard to do and that no one else could easily replicate. So that's why I went down the motorcycle route.
Right. So when you're choosing from available sport bikes, there's options there. I would imagine probably Hayabusa swaps are maybe some of the more common. Again, were there any other motorcycle engines that you considered? And if not, what was it about the CBR 1000 that just made sense to you?
Mainly, I kind of had my head set on a CBR from the beginning, just because I knew it was possible from that Matt Brown car. I knew it could be done with enough time and money. And then the cost, those Hayabusas are getting up there in price compared to like a CBR or a Yamaha R1. And I just like the sound of a flat plane crank. Like when I envision or hear in my head a 1 liter sport bike, I hear a CBR 1000. Like I hear that flat plane crank, screaming to 13,000. So that's why I went with that.
Okay. I think a lot of people consider a motorcycle engine swap for the benefit of getting yourself essentially a free 6-speed sequential gearbox that comes along with it. But of course, there are some problems in that motorbikes don't have a reverse gear. Also, I'd sort of consider maybe the weight of the car versus the weight of a sport bike would be potentially problematic for reliability of the transmission. Talk us through some of those complexities and how you dealt with them.
So those are all fair points, but I figured I could get the car. I ended up getting the car down to 1,521 pounds. That was wet. That was the driving weight with the engine and everything. So, that's still 3 times the weight of the motorcycle that the engine and transmission came in. But to lessen the load on the drivetrain, I changed the final drive ratio. So the motorcycle is a 2.6 to 1 final drive ratio. And that's with, the sprockets and the tooth count and all that. So I sent the power back to a Miata differential that has a 3.3 ring and pinion. So basically, what I like to tell people is something easy to think about is I traded top speed for acceleration, basically.
So where does that gearing ultimately leave you? I think I saw in one of your videos, first gear's about 60 mile an hour. Is that about right?
Yeah, the gearing on the bikes is kind of weird because the first gear is so long, and I think they do that because if the first gear was a normal ratio, it would be so torquey that the bike would just, flip over on itself with any throttle input. So, first is about 60 mile an hour, and then the top speed is like 130. So the rest of the gears are pretty short in there.
Yeah, that's nice and nice close gearing for sure. In terms of adapting, again, motorcycles run a chain drive and sprocket. So how did you go about adapting that sprocket output from the transmission to a drive shaft, a conventional drive shaft?
So basically, if you're sitting on the bike, the sprocket's going to be down by your left leg, and it's going to be turning forward, driving that rear tire forward. And then when I put it in the car, I rotated the engine so that where normally the sprocket would sit, or the output of the transmission, is now facing directly rear in the car towards the differential. And then to adapt it to a drive shaft, there's actually, they're called dwarf cars over here. It's like a dirt circle track racing, and they're these tiny little like mini sprint cars, I guess, and they all run these 1 liter bike engines, and they sell sprocket to drive shaft adapters, and that's exactly what it sounds like. So the one end has female splines that goes on the output shaft of the trans, and then it's got 4 female threads for a drive shaft, like a U joint.
Okay, easy as.
Yeah.
What were there any other sort of, actually, before we go further, the reverse gear issue? I know that you actually haven't resolved this in your car, so there is no reverse. Have you given any consideration to adding one, and if so, how would you go about that?
Well, I could either do Quaife makes a reverse box that's just a 1-to-1 chain drive. I think it's like lever actuated or something. So I could put that like in the trans tunnel to reverse the direction of the shaft. I've considered that. I've also considered putting like a starter motor in like a big gear or something on the face of the rear diff, and running it backwards, but that would require probably a bigger battery. So yeah, like you said, I don't have reverse. It is, I don't know. I don't drive the car a whole lot. It's kind of like a weekend toy, or like drive it Friday to work or something. So it's really light. I just roll it out of the garage and drive it to work and drive it home. So it works for me, and it saves weight and cost, not having reverse.
100%. Yeah, there's a variety of options to solve that problem, but all of them require a fair bit of work. And as you say, there's going to be adding weight to the vehicle. What are the other complexities in actually performing the engine swap? Is it any more difficult, I guess, than doing a normal automotive engine swap, other than the transmission that we've just talked about?
Yeah, nothing's really different. I think what was hard for me was actually mounting the engine, because the output of the transmission was offset from the differential, and it was left and right, and it was offset up and down. So I kind of had to mount the engine in a spot where I was going to have drive shaft clearance to go inboard and down, but then still have the angles right. The output angles have to all be parallel with the differential angles when you have offsets like that, or you're going to have, bad vibrations in the drive shaft. So that was probably the biggest challenge, was just holding the thing in place while I made mounts up to it, as far as it being in the right spot. I had a laser on it and stuff to try to get it as good as I could. And there's no vibrations or anything, so I think I got it right.
Sounds like it. In terms of actually doing that, are you leveraging any of the technology at ZZP to help you in terms of 3D scanning and CAD, or are you doing it the old-fashioned way with cardboard-aided design?
Yeah, at the time, I kind of was just doing it old fashioned. There was some things where I'd bring in and throw them on the lathe, and open up the ID of something, or put something in the mill to make a little bracket. But yeah, it was basically all just old fashioned.
In terms of comparing a motorbike engine to a car engine, what would you consider sort of pros and cons of going down this route?
Cons, the main con is noise level, and that's actually something I want to ask you about, because I cannot wrap my head around why this thing is so loud.
Really?
I have, so now it's turbocharged, but the turbo sits probably 3 feet off a cylinder head. And then I have a full exhaust that goes under the car all the way out to a muffler under the rear bumper. And I don't know if it's the frequency of exhaust pulses or something, but it is ear piercingly loud. I drive with earplugs every time.
Yeah, that is bizarre. I would have thought that there would be no issue keeping the engine pretty quiet. Particularly, you've obviously got a lot more room for an exhaust system and mufflers in a Miata than you do on a motorbike. Not having had almost any personal experience with bike engines, I don't actually know what I can offer there. But ultimately, I can't see why it would be any different to an automotive engine. Obviously, you're revving to 13,000, which is a little different, but I wouldn't have really seen any reason for that. All right, let's talk about the rest of getting this up and running, wiring and engine management. What have you done there?
So when I first put it together, like I said, it was naturally aspirated. So I actually took all the Miata wiring out of the car, and I put the motorcycle battery and fuse box and the bike ECU and all that in the car. And then
you've actually got the motorcycle gauge cluster as well, haven't you?
Yep. So a big challenge, not a big challenge, but something that took some time for me was I wanted the Miata like ignition key to work and the turn signals and all that. So that took a good amount of, just looking up wiring diagrams and all that. But it's all on the bike wiring, little battery, so it keeps the weight down, and that's nice.
That makes a lot of sense when things are stock, but as you mentioned now, you're turbocharged. So are you still running the stock ECU, or have you? There's obviously reflash options in the motorcycle world as well. How are you dealing with tuning?
So I'm still running the stock bike ECU, and I have a AEM piggyback spliced into that ECU.
So talk to us a bit more detail about how that system works.
So one of the reasons I chose it was because, like I said, when I had my Miata turbocharged on the BP engine like 10 years ago, I bought a plug and play AEM piggyback, and I didn't wire it in, I didn't tune it. I didn't really know what it was doing. So this time around, I thought it'd be kind of cool to use that, but actually, wire it in myself and tune it myself. But the reason I chose it is because I was kind of looking around the engine at the sensors and whatnot and how to control the thing. And I realized it was already running in speed density. There was no MAF sensor. It was a MAP sensor and a intake air temp sensor. There was no O2 sensor. So I knew that it was in open loop. I guess there was no feedback. So I thought, well, why don't I just instead of adding the complexity of a full standalone for all these features that I don't really need, I grabbed a piggyback from used for $300, and I did a voltage clamp on the MAP sensor. So basically, the stock ECU never sees over atmospheric pressure, and then how it works is it interrupts the injectors and just holds them open longer. So the stock ECU sends out for this load and this RPM, I want to see, say 3 milliseconds of pulse. And then my piggyback says, well, let's just add 20% to that, or, whatever cell I'm in. So, it works great. I have my air fuel ratios pretty dialed in. So,
are you able with that system to fit a larger set of injectors? Because I'm assuming here that the stock injectors would struggle with a turbocharger, or are they got a bit of headroom in them?
So actually, they have a lot of headroom because that engine has 8 injectors from factory.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so there's 4 injectors pre-throttle bodies. Right, they shoot right down into the velocity stacks, and then there's 4 injectors post-throttle bodies.
Do you happen to know in stock form if they essentially at higher RPM, higher load, both sets of injectors are running, or do they stage from the primary injectors by the intake valve to the sort of further away injectors?
So that's a good question, because I did run into this issue. I'm only controlling the bottom 4 injectors, but like you said, when you get to higher RPM, it favors the top 4 injectors for fueling. So I can only modify a pulse width that's already there. So I do have to add quite a lot of percentage to those lower injectors to get my desired air fuel ratio.
Okay. Yeah, that kind of stacks up with what I'd expect. It was a pretty common way of setting up a naturally aspirated race engine back in the British touring car days. We haven't got it up and running yet, but we've tried the same. I've always wanted to have a play around with injectors mounted outside of the intake trumpets and just see what, if any, gains you actually get. But that's on our K20 race car, which I imagine that the current rate of progress might see the light of day in about 2032. But yeah, watch this space. We'll see how that all works out. Obviously, when you're turbocharging an engine, the fueling is critical, but so is the ignition timing. How's that being dealt with this piggyback? Are you modifying the ignition timing and retarding it with boost?
So with the piggyback, you can only retard timing. You can't advance it because you're basically just interrupting the crank signal to the stock ECU and delaying it till it's happening later. I'm actually not retarding any timing right now because I'm running such low boost pressure and I'm running it pretty rich. So yeah, I'm running full bike NA ignition timing.
Wow. And pump fuel, or are you running an ethanol blend on this as well?
Nope, it's just 93 octane pump gas.
Okay. I'm surprised that you're able to get away with that, actually. In terms of power levels, just going back for a moment to when the engine was still naturally aspirated, what sort of power were you seeing on it at that point?
I made 160 wheel horsepower naturally aspirated on the dyno.
That's, a very strong reason to go with a motorcycle engine. That sort of power, I can imagine 160 at the wheels, probably 180 plus crankshaft horsepower from a 1 litre. You're not going to find too many car engines that are going to do that. With the turbo setup, what are you seeing now?
So I just posted a video on it the other day, but I made 223 wheel horsepower on a GT 2860 turbo.
Okay. Where are the limitations lie in terms of the engine reliability, internal components?
I'm not sure, and I really don't want to find out because those engines are getting kind of pricey. When I first turboed it, I did have a problem with the clutch, and funny enough, I kind of picked the wrong generation CBR because most leader bikes, they have individual coil springs holding for their pressure plate. And my generation uses a diaphragm spring, and it's no one really makes a stiffer diaphragm spring for the clutch. So I ended up just stacking 2 of the stock diaphragm springs in there, and it holds. So
On that basis, I assume there's still a strong aftermarket for people who are modifying a CBR1000 anyway. Are there aftermarket clutches available?
There are, and this is something I learned. Do you know what a slipper clutch is on a bike?
I sure do.
Okay, so I didn't know what a slipper clutch was.
Actually, maybe explain for those who don't.
So basically, a slipper clutch on a bike is going to disengage the clutch slightly on decel. So you can basically, from the way I learned, is it's for downshifting because you don't want to have an abrupt downshift because it could upset the bike and you could crash. So that's something that I have. The CBR that I use has one of those stock, a slipper clutch, which I don't necessarily know how that works since I have a lot more decel load on the clutch if I'm, maybe slipping it too much with that slipper being in there. But yeah, as far as aftermarket, if when I looked up aftermarket clutch options for the bike, it was all slipper clutches.
Yeah, I guess, and the problem there with a downshift in a car is if you don't rev match with the heel and toe blipping the throttle, you can end up essentially locking the rear wheel momentarily while it tries to essentially bring the engine RPM up. In a car, that can be a problem, but in a bike where you've only got one tire on the road, that's going to be a massive problem. So I guess that's why that makes sense that they incorporate that. In terms of the shifting as well with the sequential, I'm guessing that you're not using any flat shift mechanism. It's just because you're still on the factory ECU.
Yeah, there's some companies that make basically a strain gauge, the sensor bolts to the shifter on the trans, and then it'll cut ignition timing to help you clutchless shift. But the reason I haven't gone to one of those is because I do use the clutch every time I shift it because I'm just trying to be as nice as possible to the transmission. It's already under way more stress than obviously. So I just want to help it live as long as it can. So I do use a clutch when I shift.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's sort of you could almost consider it a bit of a fuse in the system, but yeah, obviously going to put a lot less load on the gears if you are shifting it that way. Coming back to the power levels, and you sort of just mentioned that you don't really want to find out where the limits are. I mean, a great question there is, so how do you approach that when you don't necessarily know at what power level or torque level you're going to end up finding out that maybe the conrods are not fit for purpose?
Basically, how I go about that is kind of from my old Miata days. Is you want to keep the torque down, put a bigger turbo on it than necessary, make all your power up top, and that's going to help the rods live. I kind of failed at that though, because I sized my turbo too small, which is shocking for a 1 liter engine. But I started with a GT 2560. Garrett rates it for like engines from 1.8 liters to 2.5 liters, and it's like a 45 millimeter compressor. And I had a 0.64 AR turbine housing on it, and I was seeing like 10 psi back pressure at 3 pounds of boost, which is not good. And then I switched to a GT 2860 with a 0.86 turbine housing on it, and now I'm sitting at like 2 to 1 back pressure. So
That's it's an interesting point there. I think back pressure is something that most people don't give any consideration to, but when you actually start measuring that and looking at what's happening, it's a really interesting metric. Typically, I think you'll find that in most factory turbocharged engines, a pressure ratio of sort of 2 to 1, exhaust back pressure being about double intake manifold pressure is pretty normal, because it's sort of the amount of drive pressure that's being provided to the turbine to help spool it. So the higher that is, essentially the quicker your turbo spools, but it also becomes a choke point for the engine as well. Did you do any kind of calculations in terms of turbo sizing, or was this sort of a Garrett says this will fit a 1.8 to 2.5 litre engine, let's try that and see how we get on?
yeah, pretty much that. I just, like I said, I have access to a dyno with a back pressure reading, so I figured, well, I can always go bigger in the future. But I just didn't consider the high RPM that the engine was operating at. Like Garrett, they rate something for a 2 liter engine, and I think, oh well, I only have a 1 liter, so that should be big for my engine. But they're probably not considering that I'm going to be spinning the engine up to 13,000.
Yeah, for sure. What's the move from here? Are you happy with that current turbo sizing, or are you going to go further?
I'm pretty happy with the turbo sizing now and the power it's making. So I'm probably just gonna keep it at it's 5 psi of boost and 220 wheel horsepower, and just enjoy it.
I'm interested how this stacks up in comparison to the turbo BP engine that you originally said you had, which I think you mentioned 450 wheel horsepower. How was the driving experience with half the power, but I imagine substantially less weight?
Yeah, the driving experience is it's not really apples to apples now, because like you said, the car has gotten so much lighter. I no longer have any side glass in the car, so it's to save weight. So the noise level is increased. It's definitely not as fast as it used to be, but obviously, that's not what it's all about. But yeah, like I said, as far as driving experience, I like to just build stuff. So I don't really concern myself too much of like, how it drives. I just tinker with it, and then when I get sick of it, I try something else.
And on that basis, when you do get sick of it, what's the next step?
The next step for me actually is not related to the Miata. I picked up a Scion FRS, or a BRZ, if you will. So I'm gonna do my own turbo setup on that FA20, and finally I want to do a standalone. So I got myself a Haltech Elite, and I've never fully installed a standalone by myself and tuned a car. So I'm really looking forward to that challenge.
I'm interested. We're a little off topic. I do want to come back and finish off on the Miata, but I'm interested why you went the Elite on the FRS, just given the fact it is an engine that uses both port and direct injection. That becomes quite tricky for a lot of ECUs to control. Plus, you've also got the CAN bus communication. So are you planning to strip out all of the existing electronics and run just the standalone?
Yeah, I'm gonna do away with all the DI stuff and just run it on bigger port injectors. And then for the CAN bus, the Haltech has the BRZ. At least for the first gen, they have the BRZ CAN bus language or speed built in. So my cluster and all that should work. But I was actually watching one of your videos the other day because the cam timing I think is going to be a decent challenge for me to learn on how to control these four camshafts.
I think, when you're talking variable valve timing on four camshafts, yes, on face value it seems complex, but the reality is it's just another couple of parameters to your tuning. So it sort of becomes a case of fuel, ignition, intake, cam timing, fuel and ignition, because obviously when you change the airflow into the engine with the cam timing, that may need to be addressed, and then you sort of iterate that and then go through the exhaust cam as well. So, I mean, it adds a layer of complexity and is just simply going to mean that you're going to be spending more time on the tuning side of it. Why the Elite as opposed to one of the plug and play options? I think at this point in time we've got Mtron, Motec and Lincoln now offering plug and play. There might be more as well. And actually, considering everything you do seems to involve factory ECUs, I mean, reflashing is also a very viable option on that platform.
It is, yeah. This is one of those things where I'm just trying to challenge myself. Like you were saying earlier, the stock ECU stuff nowadays is getting pretty good. A lot of people are using it, so I think it'd be kind of cool to be able to control a semi complex engine by myself with a standalone.
Yeah, I think that's pretty valid. Let's just head back to, well, it's probably related to this project as well, but to the Miata. You've got a dyno at work, as we've already discussed. It sounds like you're handling the tuning on the Miata.
Yeah, on the Miata, but not on any of the ZZP stuff.
Sure. So how did you develop those skills? I mean, tuning's very different to fabrication.
That was kind of from the original Miata build. I bought a plug and play standalone setup, and it got the car running, and the air fuel ratios were close. But I mean, that was how did I learn that? I guess was just from forum posts and YouTube. This is what you want your air fuel ratios to be for this fuel, and this is where you want your ignition timing to be, and just kind of tinkering with it from there.
I think when it comes to getting started with tuning, that the fueling side is probably easier for people to get their head around than the ignition timing. And particularly when you start adding a turbo into the mix, the timing can be pretty critical. If you go too far, you're going to end up with knock, and it's not going to end too well. How did you approach that? You mentioned forum posts, but is that all there is to it? Basically look at what other people are running for a similar combination?
Well, at the time I didn't have access to a dyno. The knock sensing on that ECU I had wasn't that great. So basically my strategy was just keep the timing low and make power with more boost.
Yeah, that's a valid way of doing it. Were you using any form of audio knock detection to sort of help you find where the limits were, or was it just be conservative?
Be conservative, yeah. So I didn't really tune the ignition timing like in the real way, but I got by, I guess.
Now with access to a dyno, have you been able to sort of spend a bit more time developing your tuning skill set?
Yeah, a little bit. I think when I get into this BRZ build, I think it's going to be elevated by setting up knock control and listening for knock and advancing the timing and doing all that kind of stuff.
Sure. With the BRZ build, FRS, I guess, they're all the same thing, let's be honest. It's a car that's pretty near and dear to my heart, so I'm interested in learning a little bit more about what your plans are with it. In terms of developing your own turbo kit for it, what's your approach? Where are you going to mount the turbo? What turbo are you planning to use?
So I got a GT 2871, which is like a 53 millimeter compressor, and I'm going to mount it up front, like behind the radiator, but off to the right a little bit of the throttle body, and just air to air, simple stuff. But there's not really a lot of DIYers necessarily that mess with these cars. Like it's a lot of just like big companies that make kits and whatnot. So I think it'd be cool to just have my own setup.
We, with our turbocharged FA20, we actually started that with an Australian-built kit, which was from AVO, I think, from memory. And we actually found that was really problematic. I think it was probably fine for street use, but the manifold that they made was all fully welded, so there was no sort of slip joints, and obviously on a horizontally opposed engine you've got quite a long run from one side to the other. That was a low mount, kind of like you're saying there, so set the turbo behind the radiator, which I quite liked because it kept all the weight sort of quite low, and also the manifold was quite short. What sort of considerations do you have around how to deal with manifold expansion and contraction as it heats up and cools down?
Exactly what you said, with having the flex in there. When you have something that's that long of a run, or when the heavy turbo is mounted that far away from the cylinder heads, I like to mount the turbo to either the chassis or the engine itself, and then run the exhaust piping to the turbo with some sort of flex in between. So basically, the idea is that the engine and the turbo are one, and then it's going to let the exhaust tubing kind of move and grow and shrink and whatnot between the two to help reduce fatigue on the manifold.
Yeah, I think what we ended up doing, you're absolutely right. You need something that's going to allow that expansion and contraction without sort of transferring it into the manifold itself or the turbocharger. We ended up cutting that manifold that we had and we just bought some double slip joints from Burn Stainless and welded those in, which actually worked quite well. In terms of fabricated turbo manifolds have kind of a bad reputation for cracking, and obviously what we've just talked about is going to be one of the driving factors in doing that, not supporting the turbocharger and having no form of expansion or flex in the manifold. Material choice, what's your go-to?
For something like that, I'm probably going to do schedule bends.
So schedule 10 thick steam pipe.
Yeah, stainless for at least like the horizontal runs that are going to be carrying a lot of it. Maybe for the vertical, maybe I can go to some thin wall stuff. But yeah, for something where the turbo's mounted pretty far away, if it's supported properly and the engine's not going to move that much, you can probably get away with thin wall stainless.
In terms of supporting the turbo, you've talked about mounting the turbo to the engine or the chassis. I'd imagine the engine makes more sense, given if you don't have solid engine mounts, the chassis to engine's going to move around. Is that a solid mount that you use, or are you using sort of rod ends to support the turbocharger mass but still actually allow some movement in it?
So like on the Miata, I have the turbo is mounted directly to the chassis, solid right to the frame rails. But like you said, that engine is mounted solid, so I know there's really no movement between the two. But then something like the BRZ, where the engine's going to be on factory mounts, then I'm probably going to try to make some sort of bracket that bolts to the front of the engine and then carries away to the turbo. So it will be solid, and then I'll let the exhaust kind of move between the two.
Okay. Any sort of considerations on modifying the engine to handle more power, or are you going to just run it stock?
I'm going to run it stock for now. This car is like supposed to be my true daily driver. Like I always buy these cars and I daily drive them, and then they get out of hand and then I stop driving them. So the aim for this build is to
it's a pretty common theme, I think.
So the aim for this car is to actually keep it streetable, rain or shine. So yeah, maybe 300 wheel horsepower, and then maybe later I'm sure I'll get the itch and probably throw some rods in it or something and try to make 400. But yeah,
interesting. We actually found the rods are the weak point, but the only problem we actually had with the rods was I bent a rod just before a live webinar, which was on launch control, and I was testing the car on our dyno just prior to going live for this webinar, and was using obviously a slightly overly aggressive launch control strategy with a little bit too much ignition retard, and it was sort of popping and banging on the launch limit as you'd expect. And then I came back to idle and I could hear this sort of light rattle, which obviously is not what you ever want to hear from an engine. And long story short, we bent one of these rods. But interestingly, we'd run up to just under 400 wheel horsepower on our mainline dyno with the stock rods, and absolutely zero issue. It was only the launch control that actually damaged them. But I think it was also, it's pretty cheap insurance. It's fitting a set of rods, and we actually found that the factory pistons were incredibly strong as long as you tune them properly. That was running on E85 fuel, and we literally never had a problem with the engine after we replaced the rods. So I think they are actually a pretty good thing if you keep the power to a reasonable level. Keeping them cool, on the other hand, is incredibly problematic. But we were driving that car on a racetrack, so probably again something that's not going to be an issue for a street-driven car.
Now, is that something when you made that 400 horsepower close to it, was that something where it was a super responsive turbo setup, or was that made kind of higher in the RPM range to?
No, it was actually, I still consider it a perfect combination. It was a Borg Warner EFR turbocharger, and it was full boost, which was only 12 or 13 psi by 3,200 RPM, and literally you could give it to someone and not tell them that it was turbocharged, and it just felt like a bigger capacity naturally aspirated engine. There was zero lag, super responsive. What we did do just for reliability when it had the stock rods was limited the boost through the sort of peak torque area, and then ramped the boost up once we were higher in the RPM. With the aftermarket rods, obviously that wasn't a consideration. The only other thing I'd say about them is fourth gear in those gearboxes is a massive weak point. Once we were sort of up at that 385 wheel horsepower mark, we could break fourth gear just about every time we went to the track. There weren't, and I actually think still aren't, a lot of off-the-shelf solutions for that platform in terms of transmission, short of going to a big dollar sequential or something, which we didn't want to do. So we actually just took all of the boost out of fourth gear. So it had run 12 to 13 psi in first, second, third, and then fifth and sixth. And then in fourth gear, I think we pulled it back to wastegate, which was maybe like 7 psi. That worked perfectly, but it was the weirdest thing to drive. You'd sort of, get to the shift light in third gear, pull fourth, the thing would feel absolutely flat. So you'd be in fourth gear for a second, and then short shift it into fifth, and it'd take off again. But maybe not the best solution, but it was the cheapest solution. It kept that gearbox pretty reliable.
Interesting. I'll remember that.
All right, I think we'll move towards wrapping this convo up, and we've got the same three questions that we ask all of our guests. So the first of those is, what's next in the future for you? Obviously, FRS development, but what else?
Like I said, FRS development. I'll be doing some videos on that, my own turbo setup, and watch me learn how to tune with a standalone, and then
we've got some courses for that.
Exactly, yeah. Hopefully we get that world record in the ATS-V. I can do some videos on that, and then as far as the Miata, I'll probably just the videos on that I'll kind of just slow down because I'm not really changing much, but I'm just going to continue to drive it and enjoy it at this power level.
We actually haven't really touched on your YouTube channel. We'll shout that out shortly. When you're running a YouTube channel like this, how much consideration do you put into the projects for yourself and what you want to do versus trying to do something that's also going to resonate with viewers? Or is it just a case of build what you want, and if people like it, they'll come?
That's an easy question because I put 100% of the thought into building what I want. And, a funny thing is, even sitting here talking to you, it's like, when I built the Miata, I didn't shoot a single video on it. The first video of it was its first test drive. I built it for myself, and then I posted a video, and people wanted to see more of it, and I started making more videos. But yeah, I build whatever I want, and it's not like obviously it's not a main source of income or anything for me. So it's just fun to shoot little videos, and I think in 10 years or so, it'll be fun to look back on, and I can show my son, he can watch videos of me building cars, so that's kind of why I do the videos.
Okay, no, fair reason. Next question, Reed, is there any advice you'd give to a younger version of yourself, or maybe some of our listeners, to help reach where you are today in your career faster, or maybe avoid some pitfalls you've come across along the way?
So I had this question beforehand, so I got a couple notes on this, but I would say the first piece of advice I have for maybe someone else is that you have to be disciplined. I hear a lot of people saying, I'm going to build this, or I'm going to do this swap, but they don't actually have the discipline to finish something like that. And I don't think a lot of people understand the time commitment that goes into building a car, not from scratch, obviously, because Mazda built the car and Honda built the engine. But I was in the garage every Saturday and most Sundays for a year straight, and I don't think people have the you see a lot of unfinished builds for sale.
100%.
I think it's because people they get to the part that's hard or boring and they throw in the towel. So my advice on that is if you're going to aim for something big, just know that you gotta stick with it.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It comes down to not understanding just how big a project like that is going to be. And it is really easy. I mean, I'm in exactly the same position with my FJ40 Land Cruiser project. I mean, that's 4 years deep. It's actually getting some really good progress right now, but you sort of get to a point where you get sick of looking at the thing. And it's also hard when you know that the finish line is just so far down the road. It's almost better, I think, if you can just bring it back to mini tasks and then tick off a task and just have that sense of satisfaction, like, yep, done. That job is now complete. Now let's move on to the next one, rather than trying to look at the project in its entirety. The other thing I would probably say is for those who want to start tinkering and building a project car or something like that, start with smaller projects. Like an engine swap is a big job, so maybe that's not the first thing you should be doing. Some smaller tasks might be a better way of kind of whetting your appetite and figuring out where your skills lie and whether you actually enjoy the process while you're going, so that you don't end up with another unfinished project on Facebook Marketplace.
Exactly. And then another piece of advice I have is actually a good quote from the guy who built that CBR1000-S600. He said, the best way to engineer something is to not engineer it at all. Just build it and see what happens. So I kind of started taking that approach because when I was younger, I would kind of overbuild everything, and I would buy the best parts and the most expensive stuff because I was so afraid of something breaking or a part failing. But now, or I guess my advice to my younger self would be to just send it. Just build something. If it breaks, then fix it. Learn to make it stronger. Or if you buy a cheap part and it fails, maybe you can look at it and come up with something better that's going to make it last. So I kind of like that quote.
Yeah, I think that's actually really good advice. I think too many people probably waste money on parts that they actually don't need for the power levels, for example, that they're trying to achieve. Engine internal components are a classic example of that. It's often quite amazing what you can get away with on a stock piston and connecting rod, provided that your tuning is on point. Now, obviously, that doesn't go for every engine. There's definitely engines out there that are known to have essentially glass con rods, and you want to be careful with that. The other aspect there, I guess, is when it's something that's going to be safety critical, I'd probably like to over-engineer that a little bit more than something that, hey, if it breaks, it's a shame, but it's not going to put you into a wall, for example.
Yeah, on the whole point of people overbuilding their car is my last piece of advice is the internet and forums and Facebook groups it's a great place to learn, but a lot of that stuff I've found is just one guy said something in 2010 that kind of sounded like an expert, and now that information is just parroted, and it might not be true. So a good example of that is back in the days on the Miata turbo.net. It was like common wisdom. It was on every post. If you're going to make over 250 horsepower, you need rods. If you're going to make over 300, you need forged pistons. And that was just like, that's what you had to have. Well, I ended up making 450 on stock pistons. I had rods in it, but I just opened up the ring gap and tuned it conservatively. And it's just funny how some of that stuff gets parroted over the years, and people just take it.
Yeah, I think that is a really valid point. Just because something is on the internet doesn't make it gospel. But particularly with the forums, I guess we've moved on a little bit from forums these days. But the build recipes that were there and people would follow them. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the only way to achieve an aim. And again, just results in people needlessly spending money on parts that at their power level they absolutely don't need.
Yep.
All right, last question for today, Reed. If people want to follow you and see what you're up to, how are they best to do so?
That's just my YouTube channel at Reed Make Car on YouTube. Simple name. I'm a simple guy, and that's how I came up with the name. I'm Reed and I make cars. So yeah,
does exactly what it says on the label.
Yep.
As usual, we'll put a link to your YouTube channel in the show notes to make it nice and easy for people to find if they can't work Google. Look, been great to chat and find out a little bit more about your MX-5 and Miata, I should say, and what goes into converting a motorcycle engine to work in a car. So thanks for your time, Reed.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Tuned In, and don't forget, by using the code podcast500 at checkout, podcast listeners can get a huge $500 off our VIP package, which includes over 40 current courses, as well as a long list of courses to be released in the future. As a VIP, you'll also get lifetime access to our members-only webinars and our community forum. Lastly, we'd love it if you could leave a review or comment on your preferred podcast platform. Your feedback really helps us to reach a wider audience, which in turn allows us to continue bringing you more high-quality guests. As a thank you, each week we'll randomly select a review or comment from Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube and send the winner a free HPA t-shirt shipped anywhere in the world. It's also a great place to ask any questions you might have too, and if your review or comment is chosen, I'll do my best to answer them directly. So this week, a big shout out to RJ String, who has said, "Podcast is amazing. Thanks for all you guys do. You made it a lot easier for me to be comfortable starting school with a lot of quality prior background knowledge." I'm stoked to hear that it's been beneficial for you, and we'll keep the knowledge coming. If you get in touch with your t-shirt size and shipping details, we'll get a fresh tee shipped straight out to you. All right, that concludes our interview, and before we sign off, I just wanted to mention, for anyone who's been perhaps hiding under a rock and hasn't heard of High Performance Academy before, we are an online training school and we specialize in teaching a range of performance automotive topics, everything from engine tuning and engine building through to wiring, car suspension and wheel alignment, data analysis, and race driver education. Now remember, you've got that coupon code. You can use podcast75 at the checkout to get $75 off the purchase of your first course. You'll find our full course list at hpacademy.com/courses. Important to mention that when you purchase a course from us, that course is yours for life as well. It never expires. You can rewatch the course as many times as you like, whenever you like. The purchase of a course will also give you 3 months of access to our Gold membership. That gives you access to our private members only forum, which is the perfect place to get answers to your specific questions. You'll also get access to our regular weekly members webinars, which is where we touch on a particular topic in the performance automotive realm. We dive into that topic for about an hour. If you can watch live, you can ask questions and get answers in real time. If the time zones don't work for you, that's fine too. You're going to get access as a Gold member to our previous webinar archive. We've got close to 300 hours of existing content in that archive. It is an absolute goldmine. So remember that coupon code podcast75. Check out our course list at hpacademy.com/courses.